Today, we're going to begin one of the most important topics in biology, DNA, the molecule that stores the genetic information. By the end of this chapter, you'll understand how scientists discovered that DNA is the genetic material, how DNA is structured, how it replicates itself, and how cells repair mistakes when replication goes wrong. As we work through this chapter, keep asking yourself one big question. How does the structure of DNA allow it to store information and pass that information accurately from one generation of cells to the next? Prior to 1952, most scientists thought that protein was the genetic material. Now, why do you think that researchers suspected proteins instead of DNA as the genetic material? Think about the number of different types of monomers that there are for proteins and for nucleic acids. Proteins are made from 20 different amino acids, while DNA contains only 4 nucleotides. At first glance, then, proteins seemed much more complex and capable of storing large amounts of information, such as all the information needed to build a body. Scientists needed evidence to determine whether DNA or protein carried the heredity information. Alfred Hershey and Martha Chase used bacteriophages, or sometimes just phages or phages, depending on what part of the world you're from. These are viruses that infect bacteria. Hershey and Chase used these to determine if proteins or DNA is actually the genetic material. Their logic was simple. When a virus infects a bacteria cell, it must inject the genetic instructions needed to make new viruses into that host cell. They labeled viral proteins with radioactive sulfur, which is an element found in proteins but not in DNA. And the viruses were then allowed to infect the bacteria. The research then spun down the solution to create a pellet of cells down at the bottom of the test tube. They found that the radioactive sulfur in the viral proteins was outside of the bacterial cells. Hershey and Chase also labeled viral DNA with radioactive phosphorus, an element that's found in DNA, but not in proteins. And again, viruses were allowed to infect bacteria. This time, the phosphorus label, which marked DNA, was discovered in the bacterial cells in the pellet at the bottom of the tube. The results of the Hershey and Chase experiment provided strong evidence that DNA, not protein, is the genetic material. But how can a relatively simple molecule hold all of the information to build a body? The answer to that question is actually answered in the next chapter. But before scientists could figure that out, they have to figure out how DNA is structured because, as you know, form follows function. So understanding the structure of DNA will give us clues of how it does its job.